Welcome back to another recording of the Elevate Media Podcast. I am Chris Anderson, your host, and today we're going to get into a topic that I'm sure you've probably heard of over and over, either good or bad, and that's hustle, and possibly even get into the topic of profits versus revenue. So a couple really cool things we're going to be diving into to give you some clarity, give you some direction with. And so I'm bringing on Chris Miles today to help us break this stuff down, those topics that, you might try to navigate on your own sometimes, but excited to have him on. So Chris, welcome to the Elevate Media Podcast.
Hey man, such a pleasure to be on here, Chris. It's like the show of Chris squared.
Right. You know? Chris. Yeah. So man, I'm excited to have you. We're chatting in the green room. Chris Miles, not myself. I'm not going to talk about myself in the third person, but Chris just finished and ran the New York Marathon not too long ago. So if you guys are familiar with that, it's a pretty cool thing. And we were just talking about our running and things of that nature. So, and how it's such a mental game a lot of the times, running a marathon, you can train and you never know what might happen. You might not expect the hills. You might not expect maybe a pulled muscle or something like that, weather. So the mentality, the mindset behind it, really have to get that, make sure that's in the right spot because anything could happen. So, and that's a lot like business, Chris. So what do you see with people in business when, they're bootstrapping there early on and their mindset and this hustle culture, this hustle, that word, where do you stand on that? And where do you see people kind of getting it wrong to kind of just dive into things right now?
Yeah. Hustle can be a season, but it's not a habit. And there's a big difference, right? Because when you are launching and you're bootstrapping a business, getting it going, yeah, there can be a certain amount of hustle because you're starting from zero, right? You start with no momentum. You got to get it going. It's just like you pedaling a bicycle. When you try to pedal a bicycle, you're putting all that effort just to turn those cranks, right? And then as it starts to turn, that momentum starts carrying you, and you're not working nearly as hard to get the same speed or effort. And that's really the focus here with business too. Is that you can hustle for a bit, but when people start telling me, I'm hustling, and they've been in business for 10, 15, 20 plus years. And pretty soon they're in their 50s and 60s, still quote unquote hustling.
Yeah.
Now you have a problem. Now you have an issue because you're not meant to be always in hustle mode. I think Elon Musk is a good example of that. Even though I know a lot of people tend to worship the ground that he walks on, the guy, with the lack of sleep that he's gotten, you're like, man, is this guy even sane? The things that comes out of his mouth, you think, all right, this guy needs some help, And that's why Gary Vee is great, and I know he would probably agree with us to some level. But you got Gary Vee and Grant Cardone and all these guys out there telling you, like, hey, you got to 10x this, you got to get bigger, and bigger, and you got to just keep running harder and harder and harder. The problem is that eventually you get to the point you say, is this all worth it?
Yeah, and I really like what you said there. Hustle can be a season, but it doesn't have to be a habit. And I think that's very spot on, because there are moments that you have to just, just get the nose to the grindstone and get after it. I just talked to someone the other day at an event. I was like, it's probably gonna be a late night for me. And they're like, oh, why? I was like, we're just in the point where, I'm trying to catch up on stuff, at this event. And it is what it is. It just has to be done to make sure I get everything done, communicate with my team, things like that. So those things just have to get done. Something has to be sacrificed. And tonight, it'll probably be a couple hours of sleep. So but that's not a habit. That sometimes happens. And it's because I went to an event. I was networking with individuals. I had more time spent doing those things versus the other actions that still had to be done. And so kind of like a little bit, sort of to your point, like that was just a small season and it's not a habit.
Yeah, you can have busy weeks. I still have them too, even though I'm part-time in my own business.
Yeah.
Still, you can have busy weeks where you're like, man, I was full-time or overtime this week. But yet when you start making it consistently that way, especially when you do it for the sake of, well, I just got to keep growing, got to keep building, got to keep going. And I'm all about that. Trust me. Like I'm all about expanding your reach. But personally, I think you need to have balance. I think no matter how much success you have in your business, it should not overcompensate what you're trying to do at home, right? Like what you're doing at home is really the ultimate measure of success in your life. Like John Wooden says, right? Most winningest, if that's a word, right?
Right.
Highest winning coach in
Mhm.
basketball, college basketball history, right? I mean, the guy just did tons of things and he's still saying, hey, yeah, we work hard, we do the fundamentals, but then we still, at the end of the day, what's our relationship with God? What's our relationship with our
Mm.
family? That's what really matters. That's something that lasts forever.
Yeah.
While a business or your profession or career or even a sports game doesn't last forever. So you want to make sure that yes, you got a good successful business. You're doing so you act in a way that you feel good. You can lay down at night saying, "Listen, I'm doing great work in my business," but still lay down at night and actually sleep in your own bed.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and it's like last night, a great example. You know, my mom watches the kids a couple days a week, just so I can have full days focused on what I need to get done. And they'd come home, or I'd got them home, and then my wife got home. She's a math teacher, and so we have that time together. And there's a point during the evening, we eating dinner, kids were playing around, that I was about to just get on my laptop and try to
Mhm.
get something done because I just got back from the event earlier this week, and I kind of sat there for a second. I'd opened my laptop, sat there, and then looked at my wife down there with our little 5 month old, and my 2 year old is running around playing. He's coming over me, like touching my leg and running back and just having a good time. And I'm like, I just opened the laptop and I just kind of look and I'm like, he's about to go to bed in maybe an hour or so. It's like, what is one less hour?
Mhm.
Uh, if I could be in both places on my laptop and here, but I'm not present with them fully. So I shut my laptop and got down there, started playing with them until we went to bed, and then I did work. No, so
Uh-huh.
it's like I think it's really like what you said, learning to prioritize that thing and have that. I like to say harmony of
Mhm.
things, because yeah, I mean you can't hustle 24/7, and you got to remember what's most important to you.
That's right. Yeah, I've been in that situation many, many times, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you, it's even harder today because before I only got emails on my computer, right? So I couldn't
Right.
access it from a phone because I had my flip phone, or
Hmm.
the pre smartphone era. Well, once it became the smartphone era, now I get all this thrill of deleting emails, right? What is all the emails that should just I'm not even going to look at, so I try to delete them to make my inbox smaller so I can focus the next day.
Yeah.
But what does that show for my example of my family? They're seeing me on the phone doing work, quote unquote, right? Even though I'm just deleting stuff, I'm not present with them. And so they had to point that out several times to say, "Are you here with us, or do you want to
Mm.
just go back in your office and work again?" And it's kind of a slap in the face, but it's a good wake up call.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just one of those things. And do not disturb on the phone. That's become one of my best friends, to switch that on. So, like, from your perspective, what are some guardrails, some barriers that you've put in place to help yourself keep that balance that those listening could probably think about adding in their lives as well?
Yeah, I'm still working on my guardrails. I'll be
Yeah.
honest, but
Yeah.
the one big one is once it's family dinner time, it's family
Mhm.
dinner time, and I'm staying away from work. For the
Yeah.
most part. That's I think that's been a big difference. Because at least I'm there, and I'm not
Hmm.
always working till dinner time either. Sometimes I work till 1 or 2 or 3 in the afternoon, right? And then
Right.
I'm able to be present. And that's another thing as well is that when I'm planning the week, it does help to plan with your significant other, your spouse or whomever, just try to
Hmm.
figure out what are the important things that need to happen. So like, my wife homeschools her daughters, and sometimes she's not always available to go, pick them up from a co-op group or something like that. So sometimes, we got to plan in is like, can I go and do that? Or can I go join her for, a doctor's appointment? She's got a doctor's appointment or something like that and help drive her or whatever. And so, those kind of things, like if you put those in your calendar first and then you build your work schedule around it,
Hmm.
I think that's kind of the ideal of being an entrepreneur, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but when I first became an entrepreneur, the image I had in my mind as a young college student was, oh, I get to determine how much money I make, when I get to work. I don't have to clock in, clock out for bathroom breaks like I had when I did a customer service telephone job, where they literally gave you a six
Yes.
minute limit on bathroom time. You still had breaks, right? And lunches and things like that. But they're like extra time outside the breaks and lunches. You can only use 6 minutes. If you go over that, you're in trouble.
Wow.
So, I mean, I became an entrepreneur because I didn't want that crap in my life. I wanted to
Hmm.
have control of my own time, my own money, my own destiny.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. I think we lose sight of that often, where we get so caught up in trying to build something bigger and
Yeah.
scale it up and all that kind of stuff. And truth is, you don't always have to scale. You could be in a place of maturity in your business and
Mhm.
keep it growing on a very stable, steady pace. You can even just stop growing it. You could just kind of hold steady,
Yeah.
or you can scale it. It's just there. But if you scale, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to waste all your time and be working 60, 80 hours a week.
Yeah. I think, yeah, especially as you mature and get that position, being able to delegate and bring people on to do other tasks frees up more time. And yeah, like I'm with you. Like one of the reasons I wanted to start a business, do entrepreneurship, and I've been in it, just a handful of years, coming up on 3 years now, as this episode's recorded. But yeah, I got tired of people telling me what my time was worth, how much money I could make, and what I could do with my time. And so I'm kind of right there with you. But yeah, that's a great point. Like you don't always have to be scaling. There's
Yeah.
that, like you said, moment of maturity where you can just kind of keep it where you're at. And that's good to remember, I think, because we see, and that's another thing, now what we have on social media all the time is, we see everyone's best, right? We see everyone
Mhm.
scaling, everyone growing, everyone making, huge quote unquote profit or revenue or whatever. And I know that's a topic within your heart too that you like talking about, but we see all that. We see all the best. And so it's like we think we have to mirror that. We think we have to continuously, be 10xing. We continuously have to be sleepless night, all this thing, sacrificing everything. And I think we just see the extreme with that from people who, started out not being at that point. They had to start
Mhm.
somewhere as well to get to that, being able to, push those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned marathon running earlier, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
everybody has their own pace, their own thing. And when you
Yep.
run a marathon, okay, granted, there are like you can get first, second, third place and things like that. But the truth is that you're really competing against yourself,
Yeah.
right? And you're running your race. Same thing in business. Run your race. Run it the way that you want to do it. Yeah, you could probably, put in 100 hours a week, right? And you could be hustling like crazy and maybe you'll grow faster. But the question is at what cost? And I'm
Yep.
not saying that increasing revenue and profit, which we can go into as well, I'm not saying that you have to do more work and energy to do that because there's other ways to create leverage.
Right.
But I think many times people just think, well, once I get to this point, then I can back off. But
Right.
there's always a next point, right? Like if you're an
Hmm.
entrepreneur, you're always looking for opportunities. It never stops.
Yeah.
And you never ever want to get in the place where you find yourself 50, 60 years old and you say, well, gee, what happened to my entire life? Now you're singing cats in the cradle, and you're crying because your kids
Yeah.
grew up and now they want to spend time with you. And now they're not, you've set an example for them not to spend time with family and they're having their own kids and all that kind of stuff. You don't want that kind of legacy. You want to have a legacy that show them that they can have real control of their life and freedom.
Yeah. And it's funny you brought up that song Cats and Cradle. It just was on the other day and I was listening to it and like actually listening to the lyrics.
Mhm.
I kind of knew what it was about and heard it many times before, but never truly just sat and like listened to the words. And if you haven't heard it, basically saying, uh, it's his dad talking. The boy wants to grow up to be like him, but he's always working all this stuff. And then eventually his son grows up and wants to, and the dad wants to spend time with the son, but he's like, hey, no, I'm too busy right now. Maybe another time. And the dad was like, oh crap, he did grow up to be like me. Like,
Mhm.
and so wasted all that time. And I was like, man, yeah. And it just reminds me like, yeah, if I didn't have kids, if I didn't have a family, sure, I could probably hustle and be 10x farther than I am right now. But I do have a family and I do have kids
Yeah.
and they're blessings and such a joy. And um, so, yeah, maybe my journey is going to be a little bit slower and that's okay. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a crucial part. And kind of going back to the social media aspect that we do see so much, the positive
Mhm.
on there. We see people, yeah, I make $100,000 a month, or I make 6 figures, 7 figure, whatever. And I've been there. I tell people we have a 6 figure agency, but I also tell people that's gross profit, or that's gross. It's not like that's not profit. That's not the end all what we bring in because we have people we pay and things like that. So like when you're looking at people who are talking about those things, like first, I guess for those who might not know the difference between the profit and the revenue.
Yeah. I mean, revenue is like if you've ever worked a job, it's your gross
Hmm.
paycheck,
Yep.
but your profit is actually what you take home after they take out taxes and everything else, right? the same thing in business. It's revenue is like the top line, like what is it you actually brought in income, but then the profit is what do you actually take home?
Yeah.
And there's a big difference. I'll tell you one of the fallacies, one of the myths that's in business is that you got to always quote unquote reinvest in your business, right?
Mm,
Now, I'll tell you, like, even though I teach about investing and passive income and things like that, I'm one of the first people to tell you that your business, especially early on, is probably your best investment, right? Because
right.
you can make more money there than just about anywhere. That being said, the problem is that if you get to this point of always quote unquote reinvesting in your business, which is just another word for saying I'm spending money in my business and have zero profit,
You're
you're
right.
always doing that, you will always be in your own rat race. It
Yep.
doesn't matter if you get to 8 figures, you get to your multiple comma club and all that kind of crap that you have people,
Yeah.
trying to promote you for, and people are like, yes, I did it. I hit 1 million or 100,000 or 10 million or whatever. Nobody cared. I mean, at the end of the day, you shouldn't care because what really makes a difference in your life is what kind of freedom do I have? What did it
Mhm.
actually buy me my time back? Or did I just get a really, really good paying job?
Right.
And if you're always reinvesting money back in your business, you're always spending money. That means you have nothing at home. And that means your spouse is going to hate you because they're going to say, man, like, yeah, you're making all this money. Sure, on social media, you're posting all this stuff that makes it look like you're successful. But at home, I'm trying to figure out how to live on a tight budget,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
that's a scary thing. Even, I go to a lot of mastermind groups. There's a lot of real estate investors and whatnot. I call them real estate investors, but really they're real estate business owners, right?
Mm.
They're those that will do certain types of strategies in real estate that are a business. They're very full time. And they'll talk about all the time how they'll make millions of dollars doing that kind of thing. And they'll have big teams and everything else, and they'll brag about it. But at the end of the day, if that business were shut down, say that there's another pandemic and they
Right.
they called your business a non-essential business, if you remember that, they
Mhm.
shut you down, I guarantee they're just as broke as everybody else because
Right.
they didn't bring that profit home. So the
Mm.
key is, what do you actually bring home in profit? What do you actually have that's left over? I learned this firsthand in 2015. And sadly, I had to go through a divorce to learn it.
Mm.
And it kind of ties in with time because
Yeah.
up to that point, I was probably working on average about 50 hours a week in my business. I was hustling, right, and grinding away in my business here, Money Ripples and stuff. And I was going speaking at this and that and doing all these things. And then as I was going through my divorce, emotionally, even though I had more than enough time, because like you said, now I'm single, so to speak, right? And I don't have my kids all around all the time. I
Yep.
was depressed. I didn't have my kids around all the time. And I read a book by Mike Michalowicz. I recommend two books by him. One is
Okay.
called The Pumpkin Plan,
Okay.
which talks about, really how to focus on those prize winning pumpkins within your business.
Mm.
And then the second one's called Profit First, which is
Oh, uh-huh.
talking about how to pay yourself first, pay your wage. Then you can reverse engineer to figure out what expenses you have to spend each month.
Mm,
So
mhm.
it's versus like most people are revenue minus expenses equals profit. That's what most people do.
Right.
He says, no, no, no. It's basically take a profit minus
Yeah.
revenue, equals expenses you can spend, right? Or really revenue minus profit, or equals expenses.
Right.
Very different mentality. It's a slight change there, but it makes all the difference.
Yeah,
And
and I love that because I haven't read that book, but that's something we basically had come to like figure out as we're been going. It's like, okay, if we're not giving ourselves like what we need, to live on and to save
yeah,
and to be able to donate, like we're gonna be super stressed. We're gonna be super anxious. We're gonna be in that mindset there. So take what we need. Obviously, we're not gonna be taking bukus of extra dollars right now,
mhm,
but take what we need a little bit more so we can live, comfortably, be fine. And then, yeah, then like what you're saying, then okay, this is what we have left. Make it work with that until we can continue to, that will slowly trickle upwards. So I love that method.
yeah. The hardest you'll ever work in your business is when you need the money, right? And it's
Right.
always the hardest to get people to pay you when you need the money. I call it
Yep.
business breath, right? Is you just reek of it, like you stank of it.
Uh-huh.
And you always know because if you ever go to those networking groups where someone's like throwing out their business cards left and right to everybody, it's like Chinese stars are thrown around the room, like it's true. Like they're
Yeah.
just like they're so desperate. That desperation energy drives
Yep.
business away, and you'll work
Yep.
5 or 10 times harder than if you're able to relax and say, you know what, I honestly don't need this one customer or this one client, but I
Yep.
know I can help them. When you come from a
Right.
place of service and you come from a place of it's about them versus about you, it's
Mhm.
amazing how people will start to say yes more often and you won't have to sell as much. And that's what happened with me. Like there when I was going through that divorce, I
Yeah.
started like analyzing all the activities I was doing in a daily basis. And I was realizing like all these networking groups I was going to locally, even though because of social media, my podcast and everything else, I don't need local groups. In fact,
Mm.
I'm already nationwide or worldwide with my podcast.
Yep.
Why am I going to all these networking groups to try to make myself feel better by speaking to a bunch of live people?
Yeah.
And so I realized when I looked at and analyzed what in my business was like the best ROI of my time and money, it was my podcast. I noticed that my podcast or being on other people's podcasts, thank you very much, is often the best ROI of my time and energy.
Yep.
And so when I realized that 80-90% of my business came from that, I was like, well, cut out all the live stage speaking, all that stuff that, fills my ego, but doesn't fill my bank account, cut that stuff out. And then I started to do that. I was working 5 or 10 hours a week instead of 50. But that next year, my revenue doubled. But more importantly, my profit octupled, like it
Mm.
8x'd that
Wow.
next year. So I made more money. Profit was way higher because I wasn't spending money doing this, that, and the other. I was just
Right.
focusing all my dollars on what works. And I know
Yep.
you talk about this in media too, because, someone I've done this before. You try to like do Instagram, TikTok,
Yep.
YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and we're throwing money all over the place. And then we had to get to the point saying, what's really the one or maybe two channels that really drive the right people to us?
Mm.
We say, well, great, cut it all out, focus all those dollars there, like double down on the thing that works, get rid of everything else that doesn't work.
Yeah. I think that's a great thing to realize. And for those listening, if you're listening right now, like take it to heart, like truly like put your ego aside and see what's truly benefiting your business and, decide that's what you want to focus on. And I think the ego, man, that that really can get us in trouble or hinder us or block us even from that growth like you just shared. Instead of trying to do it all, just do what's the best for the people you're trying to help. Because if you can't show up, if you're trying to show up everywhere and that lowers your ability to do so at a high level, then you're disservice to that audience. So if you can like hone into one or even maybe two and just get really, really good at that and have a really, really good, clear message there, you're going to serve better. You're going to help more people. And it's going to be a benefit. And then eventually, as you grow and scale, you're going to have the means and the people to expand into the other platforms and help even more people then.
Exactly.
So why do people get that so wrong with the revenue and profit? Do you think it's just poor education? Do you think it's just kind of, I guess why do people get that so wrong?
I think it is ego to some
Yeah.
level. It doesn't. You mentioned earlier, right? When people are posting like, I made 100,000 this month or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Now they didn't tell you what they made the next month, where it might have been like 3 or 4,000, right? Or wherever it might be.
Yeah.
It's kind of like and again, I'm not bagging on network marketing, right? But
Mhm.
I've had a lot of clients in there. Plus, I have family members in there too, and they've
Yeah.
made good money in that kind of business. But they'll always talk about the highest watermark of the check they
Mm.
made. They won't talk about the average, right?
Yeah.
They won't talk about the bad months.
Mhm.
Like for example, when you were talking about that, it brought up a memory for me where I remember one of the speakers I had at one of my events. She told me off to the side. She's like, "Yeah, I had a $50,000 month." Now to that point, if I hit 10, 15,000, I was pretty thrilled. If I hit
Right.
20,000, I was
Yeah.
amazed.
Yeah.
But then like that for me, like that next month was, why not me? Why can't I hit 50,000? And so I
Mhm.
hit 50,000 next month, right?
Yep.
Now, the quarter before I only made like 10,000 for the
Right.
previous 3 months total, so, I had a really rough quarter. So, of course it built up and the next 3 weeks or so, like I made 50,000, but you darn sure I'm going to be talking about that 50,000 because I feel so insecure
Right.
about not making consistent income, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I get it. So it's a rough place to be, but
Yeah.
that's why you focus on profit because, like my business, like my company, yeah, I make multiple seven figures, but the thing is I have more profit than a lot of companies that might make $10 million,
Yeah.
and I don't use that as like a badge of honor. I don't even brag about it publicly, but for myself personally, that's what gives me peace of mind
Yeah.
is that knowing that we have to have positive, we got to have profit because I don't want to make $10 million and spend 11 million. That's
Right.
called bankruptcy, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens to sports players. That's what happens
Mm.
when they make all that money and then they go broke. And you're like, how do you go broke making tens of millions? Easy. You
Right.
just spend $1 million more than what you made. That's it. Business is no different. You
Yep.
want to have that extra profit because within that profit is your freedom. You can buy your freedom back with that profit. Like you were saying, you could go and invest in, whether it be companies or consultants to help you leverage your time and get better results to drive up revenue more. You can
Mhm.
hire the key employees to take tasks and thing off your plate, where if you're just starting out, you may not have a single dime to pay anybody else but yourself.
Yep.
And so getting that profit is what allows you to buy freedom. So the focus there, don't even worry about the top line as much. Top line is important, but the profit, the bottom line, that right there is your key to freedom.
Yeah. I think because you have so much more to use and to be able to support everything going forward. And it's funny because along our journey, obviously like the marathon, every race is different, everyone's pace is different, everyone's training where they come from is different, their mindset's different. And so, but it's your journey, and like looking back on your journey, like where you've come from, it's crucial too, I think. I try to think back on when we started Elevate and where we were then. And it's like you think about the profit, the revenue you were making then, and what your concerns were, what you were, anxious about. And then you get to, the next level, and like man, myself back then, if I could see where I am now, would be like, oh my goodness, okay. So we get there. And so like
Mhm.
don't forget where you came from, and remember like you're continuing up the mountain. And so you're gonna have, new success, new problems as you continue to go. But remember like what it took to get there and what where you started, because we get in the moment and like, "Ah, I wish I was, farther up there." And we
Mhm.
forget, the steps we had to take to where we are now and how big of success that is in general.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, with that, how do you help people, increase their profit? Like where would you guide them if they're really trying to get a hold of that, um, to increase profits? Do you have any guidance from that perspective?
Yeah, like I mentioned, those books, Profit
Mhm.
First, as well as The Pumpkin Plan, which talks about really what activities to really focus on in your business.
Yeah.
The reason they call it the pumpkin plan is because have you ever seen those prize-winning pumpkins that are humongous that
Yeah.
are on the news?
Yep.
They talk about how they actually grow those pumpkins,
Okay.
and you got to keep chopping off the little pumpkins so that the vine feeds just one giant pumpkin.
Mm.
And that's one of the big things I would look at is look at the activities, look at the money that's being generated from that specific activity. Is that that activity from online sales versus in-store sales? Saying you're a brick and mortar business, right?
Mhm.
And how much is coming from there? How much do you spend in marketing to do that to get that kind of money? Because even if it gives you the highest revenue, if you spend more money to get it and it's not profitable, you might question that system and say, why am I still doing this? Right? Like, why is that really the thing that I'm putting my effort and focus into? Like my business as well, I did the same thing where we have two arms of our business, two things that we do better than anybody else, right? Like we do great at helping consult people one-on-one for creating passive income. And then we also have this strategy we teach with infinite banking using like this life insurance as a tax-free supercharged savings account to build up cash, right? And use
Mhm.
that to invest and things like that. Well, I started realizing pretty quickly that our most profitable thing was actually on the insurance side versus the one-on-one
Mm.
consulting because that took more time and effort and expense, right? Where the insurance side wasn't as much. And so we started aligning that because we started having marketers say all the same thing. They're like, "Yeah, but why don't you lead with the insurance piece?" I said, "Oh, we're not insurance. We're not like insurance guys. That's not our thing. We're all about financial freedom, passive income, like rich dad, poor dad, but actually applied." Yeah,
Mhm.
but this is easier for more people to do anyways because it's a lower price point, a lower point of entry for people. Why
Right.
don't you offer that? And so all of a sudden, just in the last few months, we said, all right, well, instead of making these two different things that we're promoting, why don't we line them up and make it like a
Mm.
funnel instead? And it's amazing how all of a sudden things just clicked and worked. So the same thing that happens in your business. There are things that maybe you aren't seeing. Maybe you need an outside perspective to look at it and really see where the opportunity is. Where do I get the best return on my time, energy, and or money in that business?
Absolutely. And that's a great way to look at it. And you got to invest in certain things. So it all goes back, you have profit, maybe you have a little bit to invest. Where would you recommend people to first invest if they had a little extra to help them kind of get going? Would it be a mentor or coach? Would it be just books? Would it be courses? Like where's your kind of your guidance with that?
It depends on what phase you're in, right? I
Mm,
mean,
okay. Yeah.
I'll tell you, like, there's times I've hired coaches to help me with my business. And sometimes I'm like, where were you 10 to 11 years ago when I was starting? Right. Um, but I know back then I'd be like, oh, like it's so tight. I'm trying to keep every dollar I've got just to, feed my family and everything else.
Right.
I don't have like 10, 15 grand laying around to hire somebody. Well, find a way to do it. Like if I could have done that and shortened that time frame, right, of success and doing the right habits early on versus doing bad habits, getting bad results, wasting money and wasting time and effort when I could have been doing it right the first time. I tell people all the time that ignorance is more expensive than education, right?
Yeah.
If you really think about it, you pay a lot more for ignorance and not doing the right things than you do for doing it right the first time.
Yeah.
So I definitely recommend finding, someone to help you in whatever you're trying to achieve. Like people when they hire us, they don't hire us really from the business side as much because I used to do that, but then
Yeah.
I realized I didn't like it that much. I didn't like looking at people's P&Ls. It was boring to me. But I love talking about investing and creating passive income with like real estate and things like that. And so, you know, if you're looking for that right coach, make sure it's somebody that aligns with what you're trying to accomplish, right? Don't hire a marketing coach if you need operations, don't hire an operations coach if you need marketing and sales, like those kind of things. Like you really just focus on where you put that effort in the education and training. And yes, there's plenty of free stuff like this show right now you can consume. But at
Yep.
some point, it's got to get to how do I apply this in my life and make it work?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that 100%. So, Chris, this has been awesome. I mean, time's flown and it's just so many good nuggets that you provided the audience, and I'm appreciative of that. If people want to connect with you, get checking out what you do, maybe communicate with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, you can visit our website, moneyripples.com. You can go there, or you can follow our podcast, which is called, surprisingly enough, the Money Ripples Podcast. So you can go follow that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, everybody, make sure you get connected with Chris, check all that out. And Chris, thank you so much again for being on the Elevate Media podcast today and sharing your expertise.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much, Chris.